your first receipt on the current transaction, that then determines the sales trust for that transaction moving forward. So you can't have some transactions for the property in one trust and then some transactions in the second trust. So that's just something to be aware of. For those of you where you do have multiple trusts, you can obviously come in and you can tell the system which is to be the default one. So what this means is that when you're going to receipt any money for the very first time, when you issue your first receipt in the property transaction, the system will give you a drop-down list of your sales trusts, but the default one it will show outside of the drop-down is the one that you nominate here. So that's where you'll obviously pick that up. You've got your general accounts. So for some of you who've migrated across from My Desktop, for whatever reason, not everyone in My Desktop had their general account details put into the database. So this is where you will need to come in and you'll put in your general account details in here. So once again, you can have multiple accounts sitting in here. So in some offices, they have it so that they pay advertising money out and it has its own general account for all the advertising costs that the businesses incur. So where you might have that scenario, you can obviously set that up and reflect that. To add in a new account, you just simply come in here, put in the details, obviously put in the BSB number. Now, one thing to note here, when you put in that BSB number and you tab across, the system is actually going to tell you which bank and branch it is. So it is a really good check for you to make sure that you've got the right details. Now, obviously, when you're setting up your own general account and bits and pieces in here, you'll know the exact details. So, but that BSB check is also used in the database when you're entering in bank account details for your clients in the database. So that's something to keep in mind. This is where you can also, with the trust account, if you're using the ABA file, this is where you will come in and set that up. Now, when you migrate across, it will bring a lot of that information across, but it is really important for those of you who only recently migrated, if you haven't yet run your first ABA, to just come in and make sure all of those details are right. Now, for those of you who don't currently use the ABA file, it is something that is really worthwhile setting up if you haven't used it in the past, because it just means that you're creating the transactions in Vault and then you're giving that file to the bank who will process all the payments for you. The APCA user ID number is one that is provided to you by your bank. Now, some banks will tell you that you can make up the number. That's not normally the case because they need to have the number on file at their end so that when they receive the payment file, they obviously know who it belongs to. So it is worthwhile just making a note here, if your bank sort of says, I don't know what that number is, that you just use this line down here and just tell them it's your user identification number. It's a unique number that is supplied by the bank to you. Now, you won't need one for the direct debit piece, but you will use it for that first field. And then you do need to know whether it's a self-balancing file or not. And this varies from bank to bank. Some banks, they will say, yes, it is, and other banks go, no, it's not. So all that means there is that if a self-balancing transaction is required, what it means is if you've created a number of transactions and they're sitting there and they total 50,000, that would be, you know, 50,000 worth of debit transactions that are coming out. If a self-balancing transaction is required, all that means is that when the ABA file is created, the system will create a credit transaction to balance the transactions that it's having sitting there. So some banks will require that and some don't. So it literally is a tick or an untick. Once you put the details in there, you simply go save, and then that's your ABA file in the database, essentially set up and ready for you to use it when you're ready to. Now, just on that, before some of you are freaking out and going, what if I set it up and I don't want certain payments to be included because we've already paid those out manually? The very first time when you come to run the ABA file in this section here, and ours is we've already got one underway. So when you click on this for the very first time to generate your payments file, what the system will do is it will ask you, when do you want to commence using the ABA file from? So you will tell it to the date. So for example, if I've set it up in the database today and I'm only going to start using the ABA file from tomorrow, when I come in tomorrow and I click on there, I can actually put in tomorrow's date, which means the system will straight away exclude any transactions in the database that are prior to that date that I've nominated. Now, once you have got the file active and you're using it, essentially every time you do a disbursement from the sales trust, the system is coming and it's putting, or it's creating the transaction and it's putting it in the system here to note that these are the transactions that are going to be included in the ABA file when you generate it. Now, what you'll see here, the system will automatically identify those transactions that it's not going to be able to include for various reasons. So on this one here, we can see there's a deposit settlement disbursement. It's not going to be able to pay this client because we've got no bank details to find on it. So that's where you would go in and add the bank details on, and then obviously that will be included when you move forward. So you can obviously tick that. At any point in time, if I've got a transaction in the ABA file, which I may have already paid independently and I don't want it to be included in that file, you'll see here I can obviously uncheck it, which is what I've done with this one on a previous training session. I've actually said pay all of the transactions but exclude this one here, and that's not to be included on the in the ABA file. Once you've gone through and checked all the bits and pieces, obviously you can see the details in there with the BSB and account number details. You then simply just go generate the file. The system will generate the file, you download it and save it, and you send it off to the bank, and the bank will process that file for you. So it's up to you how often you process the ABA file. A number of offices will process every day because obviously they've got transactions happening every day. Some of our businesses where they're slightly smaller and have less transactions might only create the ABA file every second day and send it off to the bank. But it's more around that you're processing the payments and you're obviously paying them in the time frame that is relevant to the legislation in your state. So typically most of the states, you have to disperse the funds within 48 hours of the settlement occurring. I can come in here, I can preview any of the previous ABA files. So if I just move this back a couple, let's just make that the 1st of February, go refresh. And what you will see here is the system will show me the previous ABA files. So I can obviously download those. I can now do a print-friendly version of that ABA file. So I can click on that. It will bring up the ABA file. I can see that. And obviously I can print it or save it to PDF so I can see exactly who was paid what. Now, for those of you who are using the ABA file, what you'll find is your auditors will look for this particular report because they will use that to correlate for anti-money laundering legislation to make sure that the BSB details that you have on here, for example, you had paid it to your general account, you said it was going to that account, they would then spot check your general account to see if that money is then popped up into your general account. So they will do some spot checking with that one there. This is where you can also do remittance advices. So we can do a remittance advice here. This is obviously a very sad one we've got in here. So this one was going to the REA, but we can actually show the advice. We can show the invoice that we've paid, the property it was, and then obviously we've got the details on that particular one that we've created. And then we can print that off or email it to the client. So that you can see here, we can do a bulk email straight from there if we want to. And I can check and uncheck depending on how many that I have sitting in that space. So that is the ABA file, and this is where you can also reverse it if you need to. So if for some reason you've created the ABA file and then you do need to reverse it, that is where that option lives, which we never had when we were in My Desktop. So it's very exciting to see that little file, that little option in there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come back into our setup configuration and I'm going to touch here on the invoice settings and sales. So this is where you'll have your trust account, and the system is going to show the licensee details, the business name, ABN, suburb, etc., for your receipts that are going out. So it's really important that you have the correct details in there so that they're printing as expected on your receipts and they comply with all the relevant legislation. And if you've got multiple trusts, you will obviously do that for each of the trust accounts that you have in place. So particularly important for those of you who've got the cross-border transactions, you do need to make sure that that's set up to reflect the correct ones. And obviously you'll have your logo turned on down the bottom and you can save it. You'll see there, because it knows I've got a trust on, what it's saying here, because it knows based on the state that we're in, is I can't turn the logo on without putting in my licensee details here. So it's not going to say that. So it's forcing me to put those details in so that I can have the logo. So with most of you who've migrated, we will have checked that and set it up for you basically and just tidied it as part of the migration. But if you're setting up a new one or you're having to edit anything, that's where you will do that in there. We've also got here your invoice footers for the sales section of the database. And this is where you can come and set up your invoice footers for your BPA advertising and your salespeople advertising invoices. And all you're doing in here is you're going to add the invoice footer. Now, some of you might be saying, well, why do I need multiple footers in here? And this is, in some of you, you might not need a options. You might only have the one. But for those of you where you have your invoicing that you're giving to the salespeople and where they may be paying that money direct into the general account and not your trust account, this is where you'll be able to set that up. So you'll give the footer a name, you'll put in the pay details here, and then you'll tick here to say, is this applicable for advertising for agents or is it for our owner advertising? And then that way, when you're generating the invoices, the system will actually default the one it knows that it is to use. So you'll see here on this one here, which I've got set up for our New South Wales trust transactions, I've obviously just got a plain thing. I haven't set it as a default, but the system knows it's available for me to use when I generate any of the invoices if I want to. So I'll always get that opportunity, but the default is just so that you can set a default and the other options will also be there. So that's how you control that. Now in this section here as well, you've got your email template. This relates to the email template that will be applied to your sales trust receipts when they're issued. So you can obviously put in whatever you want here, keeping in mind obviously that you can still edit the individual email when you send it out to the person that you're sending it to. So I'll just pause here because I just noticed there's a chat popped up on this window. When we create the ABA file and use the property address in the description, e.g. the ABA, yeah, so your ABA files, the number of characters, Jan, in the, so Jan has just popped in a question, guys, saying that when she creates the ABA file, they use the property description, for example, the street address and the details, and the ABA file will cut off the last piece of the description. So there's not an easy way for us to fix that because the file size restriction is based on what the banks will process. So in a lot of instances, the bank's standard fields will be no more than 24 characters long. So even though Vault will give you the opportunity to put more text in, essentially when it creates that file for the bank and sends it based on the specification that the banking industry requires, it will chop it off to only have the maximum number of characters they allow. So we can't really change that at all. For any of you who, for those of you who use your internet banking, you'll know it's the same sort of thing. The logic is the same. If you go to put in a reference, you'll see that typically the banks will only give you a certain number of characters, and typically you can't use dashes or asterisks or anything. It's a very small field. So it's essentially that same field that's being used. So there's not really a workaround. Probably what I would suggest is leaving off the street road type thing I'm just putting, you know, the number and then maybe the street and a part of the suburb, if that helps, but there's not really an easy solution. Sorry for that one. The deductions, I'm just going to touch on that briefly just while we're in this screen. This is obviously just deductions that are going to be used in the agent allocation screen, which is to do with the sales processing. So we do a separate session for that, guys. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time in here. This is essentially where you set those up. And you've got your advertising expenses in here as well. This is where those are all set up, and you can obviously come in and edit and change any of those. For those of you who may not have cleaned these or manipulated and changed them prior to the migration, you'll find this is a much easier way, obviously, to clean them and update them and remove them. Now, any advertising you currently have in play where the costs have already been allocated, the system is not going to change those existing transactions that are in play. It's only for any new advertising transactions you apply moving forward. If you're needing to create new advertising sections and bits and pieces, you can see here when you go select to the grouping, that's when it will give you the option to create the name and bits and pieces in here. So you obviously type it away, create it, and then obviously you pop that in there. So this is all the setup piece. Essentially, it sort of lives in the same area in a similar way to what it did in my desktop. Now, if I come down in here to the financials, we've got our trust reports, and we've got all the standard reports sitting in there. We've got our banking deposits, our cash payments, cash receipts, the deposits due here, which is a really easy report for you to see which deposits are due. Now, what this report does is it only shows those properties where the deposit is still required to be paid in full. Any of your properties where the deposit has already been received in full, it is not going to include it on this report because it knows it's no longer due. It's actually paid in full. You can obviously sort it by different statuses, and I can order it by address or under different statuses as well, depending on what it is that I'm wanting to look at. So you can see there that's really easy to generate, and that's available in the system, and you can also print it if you so desire to. You've also got your full ledgers in here, your journals report, and your trial balance. So one of the reports that I do recommend that people run at the end of each month as part of their balancing process is the ledger for that month, and that just shows you all the individual transactions under the individual property. You will still see those transactions both in the cash payments and the cash receipts report, but when you run the ledger, it's obviously running it by property. So if you've had a number of receipts and transactions on each particular property, you'll see all the in and outs under the property on the one report rather than having to sort of scroll up and down through different reports to find it. So that's just a really good one to actually keep in place. And it's also probably one that I recommend that you run at the end of each financial year so that you get a full ledger across all the transactions that have happened in a financial year, and it's just a really easy one to have on file. It's not one that you're going to obviously refer to on a daily basis, but it's a good one for auditors if they've got queries, because you can go, look, here's the ledgers, you can go away and have a look. You've got your trial balance here. Now, one of the things to be mindful of is in VaultRE, when you obviously come in here, you'll select your trust account, and then the default when it looks at your trial balance is to show you the trial balance for the office that has the combined amount sitting in here. So this is where you might have both advertising and a deposit money. So that is what it's saying when it's saying looking at all transactions. If I want to see just the deposits, that's when I would refresh this here, change it to deposits, and you will see there, it then gives me the trial balance with just the money that is in the trust account that relates to the deposits that we're holding. If I want to check and review the advertising, so if I want to see how much advertising we're holding in the sales trust in anticipation of obviously paying the various invoices that are coming through, I can obviously see that here, and that is showing me the advertising. Now, the advertising balances here are when you receipt the money and you say it is advertising money. If you receipt the money as deposit, that is when it is going to show under the deposits option. It is also worthwhile mentioning here, I don't think I've got one here because I've tidied it up. If you're looking at a trial balance for your advertising and you have something that shows it as a negative balance, what that actually means is that at some point in time on that particular property, you've actually gone in and you've paid out advertising money from the trust, and you've noted it as advertising, but you didn't actually receipt it in the first instance as advertising. So what it will do in that instance is it will show it as a negative. That's not saying you've overdrawn the sales trust. All it's saying is that you've taken money out and you've said it was advertising, but you didn't actually receipt the money as advertising in the first instance. So I'll show you how to process those transactions when you get those scenarios. Anyone who has an IBD, this is where it will obviously show you the IBDs that you've got sitting out to the side and are invested for your clients. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pick up a property. Just trying to think of the property I had created, which I've just had a blank. So I'll have to, wasn't one of those. Let me just pick avocado. So I'm going to pick my avocado property here. So you can see straight away, I can see who the owner is on it. I can see if I was going to go and put in a deposit on this one, essentially that the system is going to prompt me to attach the purchaser because I don't currently have the purchaser on this. And I can see that straight away by actually coming in on the screen here before I go any further. So as soon as I go into that screen, if I needed to attach a purchaser, I would obviously come across here and this one isn't a listing, so that was a bad one to choose. I would attach my purchaser and then away I would go and it would allow me to receipt some money. So let me just go, I'm sorry guys, I'm just going to go and find another property. Let me just find my properties here. Crazy mouse driving on the side. Let's see if I can find that property I created the other day. Okay, so and just while we're on this screen here, this is obviously where I can see the option to delete a property and clone a property if I need to. And the little dropout tab up the top here is where I can see who the owner is and who the purchaser is. And you might be wondering, why am I showing you that? And that's because if I've come into the purchase and I was doing something at the same time as I was coming into the record, I can see straight away here that I have actually got an owner on here and I have already attached my purchaser. Now, if I need to attach a second purchaser, I can obviously come in and do that. And I can attach a property here, or I can do and attach another purchaser. So this is simply from this options here that you can see when you're on the property card. And I can obviously duplicate check here at the same time. So in this instance here, I'm just going to come in on the financials tab. You can see here on this particular property, I haven't entered any of the sale details here at the moment. So this is why all of this information here is blank. So if you've added your sale details in, this is where you'll be able to see the unconditional date, the deposit due, the gross com, all of those bits and pieces. But let's just say I'm like super busy and I just want to go in and I want to receipt the money that the purchaser has given me. What you can see here is I've got the buttons right down the bottom here, which allow me to go straight in and receipt the money and disperse the money if I had any in there. I don't have to actually come across to the trust ledger to actually do those steps. So you'll see there, as soon as I come onto the ledger, it gives me the same buttons plus some additional ones here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do two receipts, one being advertising and one being a deposit. So in this instance, I'm going to say it's advertising money and it's come from Penny, and I'm just going to say it's 5,000. So I'm just going to go advertising. Now, if I want to link it to an invoice, if I had created an invoice for Penny, I would see that invoice from the advertising ledger sitting here. And you'll see here, as a default, when I receipt the money into the sales trust as advertising, it is automatically going to create a credit on my advertising ledger for me. This is to save you having to manually add that in. So I'm just going to leave that in. I'm going to say, yeah, create my credit, because I'll go and create my invoice later. And I've issued the receipt, and I'm going to save that. So what that's done now is it's created my receipt here. You can see it's saying it's advertising and it's partial. And if I come across here to the advertising tab, what I will now see is the credit sitting over here as well. So you can see it's sitting there and it's applied automatically. So if I, as you saw before, if I had an invoice sitting in here, the system would have automatically applied my credit of $5,000 to the relevant invoice that I had sitting there. And what that means is it just means that when you come down here and you look at your invoices, it would be showing the balances either a partial, if let's just say the invoice was 10 and I only paid 5, it would show that 5 was still owing, or if it was paid in full, it would show that the invoice is now paid in full. Okay, so if I want to come back here to the trust ledger, and what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to receipt some money from the purchaser. So all I'm going to do in this instance is I'm going to say it's from a deposit. And who is it from? So it knows who the purchaser is. If it was someone from someone other than the purchaser, so another family member that's related to Jane but who's not mentioned on the contract, you'll see here I can just go other and I can go who, and this is where I can obviously add that person in. In this instance, I'm going to say it's come from our purchaser, and I'm going to say it's $35,000. It's receipt number XYZ. It's EFT, and then I'm just going to put in my reference here. So I'm just going to go 145. Once again, you'll put in obviously your details here, and you're going to save it. And that creates the deposit on the sales trust. So you can see there straight away, it's populated that through. I've got the deposit, so I can now distinguish deposit versus advertising. So the little, this word here and this word here, when you're looking at your ledgers, tells you what you've receipted that money as. So what it means now, and the reason I'm showing you that is, let's just say the client here has incurred, let's just say they've incurred $7,500 in advertising costs, and the client has said at settlement, can you deduct the other $2,500 that I owe for advertising from the deposit? So, which happens a lot, or they say take it all out at settlement once off the deposit. So in that scenario, what you would do is you would do 2 disbursements. You would do a disbursement for $5,000, and you would disperse your $5,000 from the advertising, because that's what you initially receipted from the client. And then for the balance of the 2.5, where you're actually taking it from the deposit, that's where you will say, I'm actually taking the 2.5 from the deposit. So what you would do is you would pop that in there. So you can see here, the only difference in this instance for the balance, or where I'm taking it all at the end from the deposit, as I've said, I'm taking it from the deposit. I'm actually paying it to our advertising, because it is for the advertising. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in the reference, whoops, I'm just going to, if I can type it just so my database looks nice. I'm going to go advertising, I'll just go balance, and then I'm just going to put here so, and obviously without too many typos in this, I'll just make it so my training database doesn't look too nasty. And then I just go save. Now, what that does there is that then means that your advertising trial balance will always stay correct. If I had paid $7,500 from advertising, that's when I would end up with a negative 2.5. So what you can see here is in my reference, it's got here, it's the advertising balance. I can see the advertising has been deducted from the deposit here that we were holding, and it's the balance of advertising as per the vendor's instructions. Sorry, just excuse the way that's displaying. It's just because I'm doing the Zoom session on a small screen. So if you're on a bigger screen, obviously it doesn't wrap all the way around like that. So I can obviously come down there and I can see the total that we're holding for the particular client, so any point in time. So I can see that we received $5,000 as advertising, we received a deposit of 35, which gave us 40, and then because this property we're finalising straight away, you can see there I've deducted 2.5, which is the balance of the advertising from the deposit as per the vendor's instructions. Now, what you'll see here, we've got our tabs here where we've got other. This is obviously where I can go in and print the receipt. I can amend the description on the receipt and I can reverse it. Now, you can only reverse your receipts where they are unreconciled. So if you have already reconciled the receipt and then 2 months later you go, oh, I made a mistake, I want to reverse it, what you'll find is the system will not allow you to reverse it because you've essentially told it that it was reconciled at some point in time in the past. So it is really important that when you're reconciling, obviously that you reconcile the right items off, but don't freak out if you do need to reverse it, because if the item is unreconciled, this is where that option sits. This is also where from time to time you might have a client that rings up or comes in and says, oh, you've entered the details incorrectly on the receipt, or you missed off my partner's name, can you please add them to the receipt? In those scenarios, there is no need to reissue the receipt because essentially it's gone to the right parties. It's this that you've neglected to have that second person who was involved in the transaction added onto the receipt. So this is where you can come in and append the receipt and go add whatever their name is to it. And then you would save that, and then what you can do is you can reprint the receipt, and then obviously that would generate and you would send that out. Now, it is something to keep in mind is when you're issuing receipts, what the system will do is it will look at the first name and last name of your contact card. Now, and that's what it will default to. If you have the legal description filled out, this is will override the first name, last name. So whenever you're using the sales trust, if, for example, you knew that this was Sam Mendez and Jane Mendez, if that's what it was, what the system will do is when it issues the receipt, it's automatically going to issue the receipt in the name of the legal details that you have here. Now, that's quite an important field, especially if you've got, if you're dealing with companies, and also where people might be buying properties and they want it to be noted that the funds have come from the super fund as opposed to them as an individual. So the legal field, if it's in place in your database, that is what the system will use as the default when it issues any of the receipts and it does any payments. Now, what you'll see on your contact cards here is you have the bank details tab in here, and this is obviously so you can go in and you can put in the bank details for your contact cards. Now, that is probably a field that I say to officers that I'm working with that I would give everyone in your office access to do that or to add those details in for you. Because what it means then is if you're the person who's doing the sales trust stuff, rather than you having to enter everything all the time, if you do have staff members that are proactive in your office or they've got PAs that are doing bits and pieces for the salespeople, they can essentially enter that data for you. And what that means is that when you're in the sales trust section here and you're working through and you're getting ready to do the disbursements, you will see here that you've got a bank details screen on this section. And what this will do is it will show you all of the parties that are currently connected to this particular sales transaction. So it would show you all the owners, the purchasers, the solicitors, and obviously what it does is it will show you out to the right side here the bank details that you have on file for those clients. So straight away, if you've got no details in here but you've got them on the document or the email that you're looking at, I can obviously come in, I can edit those straight away from here, and I can put them in here. So I can go, okay, I'll pop those details in. Yep, that's the right details based on what I've got there. And the client's name is P. Buckingham. And I can pop that in. So what that will do is it updates the contact card automatically for me, and it will then obviously update the screen here for me if I was to refresh it, if it behaves as it should do. And you can see there, it's automatically popped those in. So if I'd already had those in there, if I was working through, I would be just checking them and go, oh, yep, hang on, I've got a different number for that, or yep, I've got all the details there correct. You can see there, I can edit or remove those. So if for some reason it's an old account that the client has now given us new details for, I can either edit it or remove it and add it in straight away from the beginning. So that's just a really easy little thing that sits in this section for you in here. If you were using IVDs, which is probably predominantly our New South Wales offices, this is obviously where you can go in and create your IVD. You can obviously take the money out of the trust and show that it's in the IVD and do all of those bits and pieces when you're in that section. So I'm going to come back in here to the trust ledger, actually onto the general tab. Now, what I am going to show you in this little section, you'll see here we've got like a little, what I call the post-it note pin. So when I click on this button here, this allows me to create a sticky note. So it's all of those little things that you sometimes need to remember to do at settlement or as part of the sales transaction. You don't really want to make it a full audit note, but it's something that you need to remember. So this might be things like, remember to get the second garage remote fixed. Or it might be that you've got to take money for the lawn mowing off, you know, at settlement or something like that. So you just simply add the note, click over there, that then creates it and it sits there. So what that means is if I click out of this screen and come back into the screen, is what you'll see is straight away I've got my little post-it note there. So I'm not going to forget it, and it just means that I don't need to handwrite the post-it note or have a big, you know, lots of sticky notes sitting in the screen on my files.